Ladies and gentlemen, there is a reason for every season of your life, and there is purpose in every pause. Today I want to share a truth that will challenge you, stretch you, and encourage you. One day you will see why God made you wait. Waiting is not a punishment. It is preparation. Too often we misunderstand the seasons of delay in our lives. We equate waiting with being ignored or forgotten, but that's not how God operates. When He calls you to wait, He's not withholding something from you out of cruelty or neglect. He's holding you in a place of preparation, because what He has for you requires development. His timing is perfect. Not just good, not just acceptable, but perfect. You see, when God speaks a promise over your life, it's like planting a seed in the ground. That seed carries everything necessary for the tree to grow and bear fruit, but it doesn't happen overnight. The seed must go through a process of being buried, taking root, and enduring the elements. The seasons of sunshine and rain, of warmth and cold, are all necessary for the seed to grow into a tree strong enough to bear fruit. The seed bears its fruit in the dark. While God can speak His promise over your life, the seed has to pass through living waters under the light. If you dig it up too early, you destroy its potential. In the same way, the waiting season in your life is not wasted, it is working. Joseph is a powerful example of this truth. God gave him a dream of greatness, showing him visions of leadership and influence. But the fulfillment of that dream didn't come the next day, the next month, or even the next year. Joseph faced betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. At every turn, it seemed like he was moving further away from the dream God had shown him. But in reality, every step was part of the preparation. God was not just preparing the throne for Joseph. He was preparing Joseph for the throne. Think about this. If Joseph had gone straight from the dream to the palace, he wouldn't have had the wisdom, the character, or the humility to handle the responsibility that came with his destiny. The waiting season wasn't a delay, it was divine alignment. God was building something in Joseph during those years of waiting that couldn't have been formed any other way. And the same is true for you. When God makes you wait, it's because what He has for you is bigger than you. It's not just about giving you a blessing. It's about shaping you into the person who can carry the weight of that blessing. A blessing given too soon can destroy you, but a blessing given at the right time will elevate you. That's why you must trust Him when He says wait. Waiting is not about doing nothing. It's about becoming someone. God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating the right people, the right opportunities, and the right conditions for His purpose to unfold in your life. You may not see it, but every delay has a purpose. Every pause has a plan. He is pruning, refining, and positioning you so that when the moment comes, you'll be ready to step into what He has prepared for you. It's easy to become frustrated when the waiting feels endless. The human heart craves instant answers, immediate results, and quick resolutions. But God's ways are higher than ours, and His vision extends beyond what we can see. He's not just concerned with the blessing itself. He's concerned with your ability to steward it well. Will you grow in faith during the waiting, or will you grow in frustration? Will you trust Him even when His plan doesn't match your timeline? Faith is not about demanding immediate answers. It's about believing that God is working even when you cannot see it. The Bible tells us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Waiting is not weakness, it is renewal. It is in the waiting that your character is shaped, your patience is tested, and your trust is deepened. One day you will look back and see why God made you wait. And when that day comes, you will realize that it wasn't just about the blessing. It was about who you became in the process. God's timing is perfect. Waiting is not a punishment. It is preparation. Delay is not denial. What seems like a delay to you is divine alignment in God's perfect plan. It's easy to interpret waiting as rejection. But with God, a delay is not the same as a no. It is simply a not yet. And the reason for that not yet is often rooted in love and wisdom, because He knows you're not ready for what He has in store. When we experience delays, our immediate reaction is to feel forgotten or overlooked. We begin to question God's faithfulness and wonder if His promises are true. But let me tell you this: God does not make promises that He does not intend to keep. The Bible says that his word will not return to him void, but will accomplish the purpose for which he sent it. So, if God has spoken a promise over your life, know this: his delay is not a denial. It is divine orchestration, working things together for your good and his glory. Think about how often we ask God for blessings that we are not yet prepared to receive. We want the promotion, but we're not ready for the responsibility. We want the relationship, but we're not yet emotionally mature enough to handle it. We want the platform, but we haven't developed the character to sustain it. God, in his infinite wisdom, knows that giving us something too soon could cause us to fumble it. So instead of denying us, he lovingly says, "Not yet." Take the story of Abraham and Sarah as an example. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but that promise didn't come to pass immediately. Decades passed before Isaac was born. Along the way, Abraham and Sarah tried to take matters into their own hands, attempting to force God's promise into their timing. The result was chaos and unnecessary pain. Yet even in their impatience, God remained faithful. The delay wasn't a denial of his promise. It was part of his plan. You see, God's promises are like ripe fruit. If you try to pick fruit before it's ready, it's bitter and hard to digest. But if you wait for it to mature, it becomes sweet and nourishing. God knows the exact moment when the fruit of his promises will be ready in your life. He is not withholding it to frustrate you. He is holding it back because he loves you enough to give it at the right time, when you can fully enjoy and steward it. Think about David, who was anointed king as a young shepherd boy. He didn't immediately ascend to the throne. Instead, he spent years in the wilderness, running from Saul, facing battles and enduring hardships. It would have been easy for David to think that God's promise had been revoked. But the delay was not denial. During that time, God was refining David, teaching him to trust and preparing him to rule with wisdom and humility. God says to David, by the time David became king, he was not only ready to lead, but to lead well. The same is true for you. Every delay in your life is an opportunity for God to prepare you. It's not that he's forgotten about you or abandoned his promise. It's that he's aligning everything according to his divine plan. He's working on the things you can't see, putting pieces in place so that when the time comes, everything will fit perfectly. Sometimes the delay is about what God is doing in you. He's shaping your character, increasing your faith, and teaching you to trust him. Other times, the delay is about what God is doing around you. He's moving people, situations, and circumstances into position so that his plan can unfold in the way that brings him the most glory and you the most fulfillment. So, don't mistake delay for denial. Trust that God's timing is perfect and his plans are good. When he says, "Not yet," it's because he's preparing something far greater than you can imagine. When the time comes, you'll see that the waiting was worth it, and the promise was worth the process. The waiting season is a season of development. It's not a punishment, and it's not wasted time. It's God's divine workshop, where he is crafting, shaping, and molding you into the person he needs you to be for the blessing he has already prepared. God doesn't just give blessings, he prepares vessels to carry them. And the waiting season is where that preparation takes place. Think about this. Before any masterpiece is displayed, it goes through a process. A sculptor spends countless hours chiseling away at the stone, shaping and refining it until it becomes the vision he had in mind. The stone might feel the pressure of every strike, but without those deliberate and precise movements, it could never become what it was meant to be. Similarly, in your waiting season, God is refining your character, building your strength, and preparing you to carry the weight of the destiny he has designed for you. In our culture, waiting is often seen as wasted time, but in God's kingdom, waiting is working time. He uses it to stretch your faith, test your patience, and teach you perseverance. He allows circumstances to reveal the areas in your life that need growth. Are you quick to complain? Do you lack discipline? Are you leaning on your own understanding instead of trusting him? These are the questions God answers in the waiting season, not to condemn you, but to strengthen you. Take Moses, for example. He spent 40 years in the desert before God called him to lead Israel out of Egypt. 40 years. During that time, Moses wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He was being prepared. God was teaching him humility, patience, and reliance on his power. When the time finally came for Moses to stand before Pharaoh, he wasn't the same impulsive man who had once tried to deliver Israel by his own strength. He was a man who understood that without God, he could do nothing. The waiting season is also a time when your faith is stretched. Faith that isn't tested cannot grow. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well and answers come quickly, but it's in the silence, in the unanswered prayers, and in the long nights of waiting that your faith is strengthened. You learn to trust not in what you see, but in the one who sees it all. And let's not overlook the way God uses waiting to teach us gratitude. Sometimes we don't truly appreciate the blessings we receive because they come too easily. But when you've waited, when you've prayed, when you've endured, and when you've pressed on in faith, you don't take the blessing for granted. You cherish it because you know what it cost to hold on until the promise came to pass. David experienced this firsthand. After being anointed king as a young man, he spent years in the wilderness, running for his life and waiting for the throne God had promised. But during that time, God was developing David into the kind of king Israel needed. David learned to lean on God, to lead with humility, and to trust God's timing. By the time he became king, he wasn't just sitting on the throne. He was ruling with wisdom and a heart after God. The waiting season also reveals what's in your heart. When things don't happen as quickly as you'd like, do you grow frustrated and bitter, or do you remain faithful and steadfast? Waiting refines you, burns away the impatience, and teaches you to keep your eyes fixed on God. It's not about sitting idle, it's about becoming the person God created you to be. So if you find yourself in a season of waiting, don't despise it, lean into it. Ask God what He's teaching you, what He's developing in you, and what He's preparing you for. Remember, He doesn't waste time and He doesn't waste seasons. The waiting season is His workshop, and you are His masterpiece in progress. Trust that when the time comes, you will not only receive the blessing, but be ready to handle it with grace, strength, and wisdom. God's vision requires maturity. It is a profound truth that you cannot fully handle your destiny prematurely. While we often pray for God's promises to manifest quickly, we rarely realize that a blessing given too early can become a burden instead of a gift. God, in His infinite wisdom, waits until your character matches the weight of your call. The child may be excited, even passionate about driving, but without the maturity, training, and discipline necessary, that same car could become dangerous in their hands. In the same way, God will not release a blessing in your life until you have the capacity to steward it wisely. It's not because He's withholding good things from you, but because He loves you enough to wait until you are ready. Consider Joseph once again. As a teenager, Joseph received a dream from God that he would one day rise to a position of great authority. He saw his brothers bowing down to him, and he knew God had a significant plan for his life. But Joseph was not ready to handle that kind of responsibility. He was young, inexperienced, and even a bit arrogant. If God had placed him in a position of authority at that moment, Joseph might have misused the power or allowed pride to corrupt him. Instead, God allowed Joseph to go through a process of maturity, a process that involved betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. At first glance, it may have seemed like Joseph was moving further away from his destiny, but in reality, God was shaping him. Every trial he faced, every moment of adversity, was developing the character, resilience, and humility he would need to lead with wisdom and integrity. By the time Joseph stood before Pharaoh and was given authority over all of Egypt, he wasn't just a dreamer. He was a mature leader, ready to carry the weight of his calling. The same principle applies to your life. God's vision for you is always bigger than you, and it requires growth. If you step into your destiny before you're ready, the very thing that was meant to bless you could overwhelm you. That's why God takes you through seasons of preparation. Seasons that may feel uncomfortable, challenging, or even frustrating, but are necessary for your maturity. Because that's the time when your heart must be stronger, God's process of maturation often involves stretching. He will stretch your patience, stretch your faith, and stretch your capacity to trust Him. It is in these moments of stretching that you grow. Like a tree planted by the water, you need time for your roots to grow deep before you can bear fruit that lasts. If a tree produces fruit before its roots are strong, the weight of the fruit can cause the entire tree to collapse. God is not just interested in you bearing fruit. He wants you to remain standing under the weight of the fruit. Maturity also means learning to see things from God's perspective. When you're immature, you may focus solely on the promise, wanting it to come to pass as quickly as possible. But maturity teaches you to value the process as much as the promise. It shifts your mindset from, when will I get there, to, what is God teaching me here? It's in the waiting and the preparation that you develop the wisdom, patience, and endurance necessary to sustain the vision. David's story is another example of this truth. As a young shepherd boy, he was anointed to be king, but he didn't ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years tending sheep, facing giants, and hiding in caves. Each of these experiences was preparing him to rule with the heart of a shepherd, the courage of a warrior, and the humility of a servant. By the time he became king, David had the maturity to lead his people with compassion and wisdom. God's timing is intentional. He waits until you are ready because He knows what's at stake. He knows the weight of the calling He's placed on your life, and He knows what it will take to sustain it. A vision from God isn't just about achieving success. It's about fulfilling purpose. And fulfilling purpose requires maturity. So, if you feel like God is making you wait, trust that He's doing it for your good. He's not delaying to frustrate you. He's preparing you to handle the blessing without being crushed by it. Let Him develop you, refine you, and strengthen you, because when the time comes, you'll not only step into your destiny, you'll be ready to walk in it with confidence and grace. There is purpose in every pause. In God's kingdom, waiting seasons are never idle or meaningless. They are working seasons. During these times, God is cultivating, pruning, and positioning you for the greatness He has already designed for your life. While it may feel like nothing is happening, heaven is busy orchestrating what you cannot yet see. You see, when God calls you to wait, He is not wasting your time. He is preparing you for His time. We often associate waiting with inactivity, but in God's hands, waiting is deeply intentional. It is during these seasons that He does some of His most important work in your life. He is not only aligning circumstances around you, but also refining the person within you. He is building your character, stretching your faith, and teaching you to trust Him in ways you never have before. Consider the process of pruning in a vineyard. A vine that is left unpruned may grow wildly, but it will never bear much fruit. Pruning may seem harsh. It involves cutting away parts of the vine, but it is necessary for the vine to reach its full potential. In the same way, God uses waiting seasons to prune the areas of your life that are holding you back. He cuts away impatience, pride, fear, and anything else that could hinder your growth. It's not always comfortable, but it's always purposeful. Take the story of Esther, for example. Esther didn't immediately step into her role as queen to save her people. She went through a season of preparation, undergoing months of refinement before she was positioned to fulfill her destiny. That waiting season was not wasted. It was a time when God was aligning everything for His purpose. By the time Esther was called to act, she was ready, and her obedience saved an entire nation. Sometimes the purpose of the pause is not just about you. It's also about what God is doing around you. He may be preparing the hearts of others, aligning resources, or opening doors that are not yet ready for you to walk through. Waiting is as much about timing as it is about trust. Trust that God's delays are deliberate, and His pauses are pregnant with purpose. Here, waiting seasons also teach us dependence. When life moves too fast, it's easy to rely on our own strength and understanding. But in the pause, we are reminded that we are not in control. God is. It is in these moments of stillness that we learn to lean on Him, to listen for His voice, and to grow in intimacy with Him. The pause is where we stop striving and start abiding, where we stop trying to figure everything out and start trusting that He already has it figured out. Remember, even nature reflects this truth. A seed buried in the ground appears to be in a state of pause, but beneath the surface, life is stirring. Roots are growing, nutrients are being absorbed, and the foundation is being laid for what will eventually break through the soil. Without the pause, there will be no growth. Without the hidden work, there will be no harvest. Think of David once more. Before he became king, he spent years in the wilderness tending sheep, fighting lions and bears, and developing the skills that would later serve him on the battlefield and in the palace. At the time, it may have seemed like David was stuck in obscurity, but every day in that pasture was part of God's preparation. The pause wasn't a period of inactivity. It was a period of intense training for the purpose that lay ahead. The waiting season is also where God teaches you gratitude. When things don't happen instantly, you learn to appreciate them more deeply when they do. You begin to see the value in what you once took for granted. The pause cultivates a heart of thankfulness, teaching you to recognize the beauty of the process as much as the outcome. So, don't despise the pause. Don't rush through it or try to shortcut your way out of it. Embrace it, because there is purpose in every moment of waiting. God is at work, even when you can't see it. He is cultivating the gifts within you, pruning away the things that don't belong, and positioning you for the greatness He has planned. When the pause ends, you will look back and realize that every moment was necessary, every delay was intentional, and every step was preparing you for something far greater than you imagined. The test of trust is one of the greatest lessons found in waiting. It is in the quiet moments, when answers seem delayed and the path forward is unclear, that the depth of your trust in God is revealed. Waiting isn't just about patience, it's about faith. And faith is not demanding immediate answers or visible evidence. It's believing that God is working, even when you cannot see or understand His plans. Trust is easy when life is predictable, when everything is going well and God's promises seem to unfold quickly. Faith requires little effort. But true trust is tested in the waiting, in the spaces where you're unsure, when prayers seem unanswered, and when you're tempted to wonder if God has forgotten you. It is in these seasons that your faith grows deeper, stronger, and more resilient. Take the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, but before they could enter it, they spent 40 years wandering in what seemed like a barren, endless desert. Why? Because God was testing their trust. He was teaching them to rely on Him daily for manna, for water, for guidance. It wasn't about the destination. It was about developing their dependence on Him. The wilderness wasn't a punishment. It was a proving ground, a place where their faith was refined and their trust in God's provision was solidified. When you are waiting, it can feel like God is silent, but His silence does not mean His absence. Often He is working in ways that are beyond your understanding, aligning things that you can't see and preparing answers that will come at just the right time. Trusting God in the waiting means resting in His character, not your circumstances. It means believing that He is faithful, that He is good, and that His plans for you are greater than anything you could orchestrate on your own. Consider Job, a man whose trust in God was tested to the extreme. When everything he had was taken from him, his wealth, his health, and even his family, Job didn't abandon his faith. Instead, he declared, "Though He slay me, yet will I trust Him." Job's trust wasn't based on his understanding of why things were happening. It was rooted in his confidence in who God is. His faith endured the test because it wasn't dependent on immediate answers or outcomes, but on the unshakable truth of God's sovereignty and goodness. Waiting is also a test of where you place your trust. Do you rely on your own understanding, or do you lean on God's wisdom? Do you try to force outcomes, or do you surrender to His timing? Waiting has a way of exposing our need for control, but it also invites us to let go and let God lead. When you trust Him, you're not just saying, "I believe in you, God." You're saying, "I believe you know what's best, even when I don't." Trusting God in the waiting doesn't mean sitting idly by. it means actively choosing faith over fear, surrender over striving, and hope over despair. It means praying even when the answers seem far away. It means worshiping even when your heart feels heavy. It means stepping forward in obedience even when the full picture hasn't been revealed. Trust is an active choice, a declaration that you believe God is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised. Think of Abraham, the father of faith. God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, but years passed without a single child. Abraham had every reason to doubt, but instead he chose to trust. The Bible says that Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. His faith was not in the timeline of the promise, but in the faithfulness of the one who made the promise. The waiting season tests your faith, but it also strengthens it. Each day you choose to trust God, even when the answers aren't clear. You build spiritual muscles that will sustain you in future seasons. The waiting season is not wasted. It is where your faith is fortified, your hope is anchored, and your trust in God is deepened. So when you're in the middle of waiting, remember that it's not just a pause in your journey, it's a test of trust. And when you choose to trust God in the waiting, you're not just proving your faith, you're growing it. You're learning to walk by faith, not by sight, and to rest in the truth that God is always working, even when you cannot see it. My friends, as we come to the end of this message, I want you to hear this with clarity and conviction. God's delays are never His denials. The waiting seasons in your life are not moments of abandonment, but seasons of divine preparation. Every pause, every test, every unanswered prayer is a part of the masterpiece God is painting for your life. The question is not whether God will fulfill His promises. The question is whether you will trust Him through the process. Understand this: God is not withholding from you, He is working for you. He is aligning situations, shaping your character, and building the foundation that will sustain the greatness He has planned for you. What feels like a delay is often divine alignment. What feels like silence is often strategy. And what feels like waiting is often the workshop of heaven, where God is crafting the extraordinary out of the ordinary. Do not despise the wait. Do not grow weary in the pause. For in due season, His perfect season, you will reap if you do not give up. Remember, God's timing is not just perfect, it is purposeful. His vision for your life is far greater than what you see right now. And when He finally releases what He has promised, you will understand why you had to wait, why you had to endure, and why you had to grow. You were not made for mediocrity. You were created for destiny, and destiny requires development. Trust God in the waiting, because one day you will look back and say with confidence, "It was good that I waited." God is faithful to finish what He started. He is too wise to make a mistake and too loving to ever withhold what is best for you. So stand firm in faith. Keep your eyes fixed on Him. The one who called you is faithful, and in His perfect timing, you will see why He made you wait. And when that day comes, you will not just step into your promise. You will step into it with strength, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of the God who orchestrated it all. Amen.